I think social media has changed things just a little bit. It's allowed people to either panic faster. So I think some of the reason why we may be a little more amped up than we were is because of social media and the 24-hour news cycle. You know, when we were kids in the 1980s, the only source of information was the evening news. There wasn't a 24-hour news cycle. There wasn't an internet. There wasn't smartphones. And so you had to have the evening news provide you with whatever the information was that you felt was important. Today, social media can, through a false story, set off a panic. The 24-hour news cycle can actually pick up stories that aren't true. An early example of this, was in 2004 when 60 Minutes ran the Bush National Guard papers. And there's a movie about that called Truth that I recommend people watch. But it was an early example of technology through forgery trying to create an issue that started a firestorm around President Bush. But then almost instantaneously, when people found out it was a forgery, the fire came back and blew the other way.
Wait, so that wasn't real? I mean, like, I have
No.
that's funny because so 2000 to 2004, I would have been in college. Bush would have been seen as the devil. It was almost obvious that he had skipped out on his service or been bad. I don't even remember what it was, but my general taste in my mouth even today is he cheated the system. What's the true story there?
So it may be true that he did cheat the system, but the story that was run on 60 Minutes was based on documentation that was forged. The memos were typed in Microsoft Word.
Oh yeah, so
and
that
run
didn't
through
exist.
A copier. and Mary Mapes was the executive producer. And I want to say this too. Mary Mapes was dragged through the mud for what happened.
I don't know who Mary Mapes is.
She was the executive producer of the story. She also won a Peabody for Abu Ghraib, the Abu Ghraib story, which was a really good piece of journalism. But then she went to this Bush National Guard thing, and Dan Rather got tied into it. This is how Dan Rather lost his job with CBS News.
I remember him knowing something he did wrong, but this was all the Melu. I didn't even understand. What happened with, tell the story, man. This is a story I don't understand.
So the movie Truth presents it in a way that's sympathetic to Dan Rather and Mary Mapes. And I don't think that was quite the way to go, but I do think it's a little more towards the middle. They made a mistake. They should have apologized for it. They should have said, we're moving on. But what happened was some retired colonel called Mary Mapes. He said, I have documents for you that show that President Bush skipped out on his National Guard responsibilities. And so Mary went to meet with this colonel, and they sat down and talked, and he was not in good health. And he presents her with all these documents, and he says, she's like, where's the originals? Well, they had to be destroyed. They were copies. They were all photocopies of these things. So Mary starts to work on verifying this story. Well, a couple people are dead. And there was a guy named Ben Barnes, who was lieutenant governor of the state of Texas. And he, in a public speech, said that he got George W. Bush in the National Guard. And it was recorded, and he didn't know it. So Mary got the recording and went to him and said, you got to sit down and talk about this. So that added to the situation, because she wanted to prove that it was like a good old boys club where all the rich kids came into this division of the National Guard, didn't do anything, and got their Vietnam service and avoided going to Vietnam. So she moves forward with these documents, and she gets a retired general on the phone, and she reads the documents off, and she says to him, is this consistent with this individual who wrote this letter, who's now dead? And he says yes. And so 60 Minutes uses that then to run the story. So they use the general on the phone. His name is General Hodges. They use the retired colonel providing the paperwork, and they use Ben Barnes, and they run this story. And it was maybe 48 hours later, people online started saying those memos are fake. They're Microsoft Word reproductions. And so 60 Minutes started doing the investigation, and they noticed, yes, they are Microsoft Word reproductions. And I should step back here and say that they had 4 document examiners review the documents, and 2 of them felt that they were authentic based on signature analysis. And then another one said, well, I'd like to look at the original documents. And so they just kind of ignored what she said and went with the other people. And they also talked about the tone of the letters. So this is authentic because of the tone. Well, then the whole thing started to unravel. You know, you had the Microsoft Word situation. Then they went to the colonel, who originally said, I got these documents from another military source. And he said, actually, I got called to a Holiday Inn, and this woman named Ramona gave me the documents and never gave me the originals. And
Oh, so it really was planted.
It really got yeah.
So somebody came in there and was like, we're gonna plant this. It wasn't just like
it was a very strategic plant of information. But as you Mary Mapes, and they had 2 other executive producers resign, and then ultimately Dan Rather left. And it wasn't tied together. They made him kind of wait. He waited until after the election and after the inauguration, actually, to leave. It's a good movie, but it tries to make you sympathetic to what they were doing. And frankly, I would never go on television with stuff like that without further verification. And so I think they made a mistake. I think they should have apologized. But yeah, the fervor that came, it was one way and then it switched way over to the other, was incredible.
I worked in I was an intern for a news magazine, and it was called Now on PBS. And it was with a guy named David Brancaccio, who now, if you turn on NPR in the morning and you hear the market report, that's David Brancaccio. Good guy, right? But I did get an insight into the funding model that they use to be able to create these 60 minutes like news magazine shows. And even then, so that would have been, I don't know, 2010 or something like that I was doing that, maybe a little earlier, 2008. And there is so much pressure for them to take a complicated story and make it, 1, simple enough for a 6th grader to be able to understand, and 2, intriguing enough that you're like, I must watch this, because if I don't, there'll be something about the world that I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the reporters at the time, you know, they were good people. They definitely had a political bent. They definitely had like a way of viewing the world, but they were not trying to go out and you know, spread bad stories. Their whole thing was they were trying to get a paycheck, and the way you got that paycheck was you kept people's attention. The thing that it did for me when I was doing this news magazine is it helped me to understand that 60 Minutes is a brand, but it does not make people qualified to give you any more information than the people that you meet at the coffee shop or the people that you meet in these other environments, because they're just a person telling a story and they know how to operate a camera. That was really, really healthy for me as social media began accelerating and you start seeing things online. And it's so easy to agree with the thing. It's so easy to propagate the ideas that you agree with about how bad the other guy is or how good the other one. I mean, and I can even tell right now, as you're telling the story, like, I'm far more conservative than I was certainly as a grad student, right? So as I hear you telling the George Bush story, I'm like, oh, I bet they treated him badly. And then I'm like, you know, I'm pretty sure he probably didn't want to go to Vietnam, and I'm pretty sure he had the power with his family to not do things right. So there's probably some truth there that somebody was trying to get out, and then they just get off the track and they go further and further and further. And I think social media has turned regular people into the same incentive structure as those journalists that are just trying to get the feedback that they're looking for so that way they can keep going. And I think the perverse incentives on social media is I don't think that's anything revolutionary, that it's kind of destroying the way we think about things, but I don't know how we get out of that, and I don't see how it gets better.
I think we get out of it by, frankly, not giving attention to it. So if somebody blasts something on social media that is like, you know, breaking news, you need to verify that before you feed into it in any way, shape, or form. So if somebody breaks in and says, well, the one that's been going on lately that maybe some of your listeners can relate to, especially in cities, is people are doing fake mass shooter alerts.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that. So talk about that.
So, and I don't know too terribly much about it because I'm not as tied into like Twitter as others. So they
did it in the Capitol, right?
Yeah,
they said like there was a mass shooting. It's on the grounds, and they end up scrambling like real.
And if there's some guy out there that hates some business or some mall, he'll start that rumor that there's an active shooter nearby, and scare the crap out of everybody and close the business down. And you have the police out there, and I mean, but it's one of the things that's going on that talks to that whole panic culture on social media. And I'll see those now, and obviously my blood pressure will go up for the folks in that area. But then I stop and say, I need to verify this. And that's where the Twitters, the Facebooks of the world are going to need to get on board with some type of authentication of some of this stuff, because they will become less relevant if the people that are given the attention are not telling the truth.
Oh, I don't think that.
You don't think that?
Because
you think it'll be the other way around?
They're attention generation machines. Like whether or not they lose credibility, like people go to Twitter to find the things that agree with what they say. I think the best thing I've seen Twitter do, I hate it when they mess around with my newsfeed. I just want my newsfeed to be whoever I have chosen to follow, show it to me in real time. But they added this new thing where if you see a tweet that somebody's put out, let's say I see that you've posted an article and I like the headline, right? So I think, oh, that's interesting. So I just hit retweet, but I haven't actually clicked on the article. It does send this little reminder up that's like, are you sure you don't want to read this first? And it's only happened to me twice. And that was enough for me to be like, that's probably good. I probably shouldn't be retweeting articles that I'm not reading, that I just like that headline. And that's the kind of verification that I think they can do. But you don't want them in the news curation business. You don't want them in the information curation business, because the people living and working in that world, the way they view what is true, or the way they view how to verify something, is really different than the way Jeremy Lacoste, views something and reviews it. And I don't think they're going to get you any more accurate information if they do that. And I certainly don't think AI can do any better.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.